Welcome you to the Institute for the Humanities at the University of Illinois at Chicago. My name is Dean Tantillo. I'm Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and it is really my pleasure to be here to open this final day of the Shari'a and Halakha in America conference. I would like to first thank the sponsors of this event, IIT Chicago Kent Law School, the UIC Jewish Muslim Initiative, and the UIC Institute for the Humanities. I would most specifically like to thank the coordinators, UIC's Samuel Fleischacker and Junaid Qadri, and Chicago Kent's Mark Rosen. Thank you very much for bringing this together. I've been looking at the program and it's really amazing. I've heard that yesterday's program was really wonderful, and I can think of very few things that are more important to discussions of liberal democracy about where religious freedom and where law intertwines with the notions of a liberal democracy. So I'm really grateful that we're able to do this conference here on our campus. So we're really proud at UIC to be the home of the Jewish Muslim Initiative and all the valuable events and collaborations we're able to do here with community groups, with other organizations, and of course today most especially with IIT Kent Law School. We are a school with a large Muslim population in one of America's most ethnically diverse cities, and in fact our campus is one of the most diverse in the nation. And we have a group of faculty with strong interest in Jewish and Islam studies, and so we are well situated at UIC to take a lead and to work with others in this area of Jewish-Muslim collaboration and initiatives. A major component of this initiative is the interdisciplinary work brought about by the research done by our faculty, and even in the discourse that is centered in our classrooms. The results of this research and discourse on this campus are then brought to a wider community through events, through publications, through actions and activities within the communities, and including this one, which we're especially proud to be part of. So I would like to thank you for coming, and I wish you a very successful stay on our campus, and I also wish you a very productive conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dean Tantillo. We are very grateful for UIC's support for the Jewish Muslim Initiative and all the help that you and the Dean's Office and your predecessors have given us over the years, which has really been terrific. We're also grateful for the support we've had from Chicago Kent, and we're proud and pleased to have worked with Chicago Kent several times in this initiative, which is really quite wonderful. I should also mention that there was an individual gift by an alum, I believe, of UIC named David Gassman, who contributed specifically for conferences on Jewish-Muslim relations, which has also helped out with the conference. So we'll begin this morning with a slightly different format than we had yesterday, different from all the other panels, a roundtable discussion. I will introduce the three participants now. They will all come up. They'll all speak for about 10 minutes. 10-15 minutes. We're not going to be strict clock watchers here, but it's basically short introductions. They'll then respond to one another somewhat, and then we'll have an open discussion with the entire audience on the topic of the Anti-Shari'a Movement in America. Unfortunately, I think of this as a Lemony Snicket conference, and we had a series of unfortunate events. And one of them was, and this is actually the saddest, but I think everything's okay, that Nadia Marzuki, who was going to be one of the speakers, had a bike accident last Friday. Fortunately, she was wearing a helmet, and she seems to be okay, but she was warned by her doctors not to fly, so she did not come here. But we are we over here at least are lucky in that we, in the last minute, as we have throughout this conference, found a wonderful person to speak in her stead, who is Ann Bambach, who is a PhD candidate at Emory University, where she is writing a dissertation about Islamic arbitration in the United States. She received her master's in theology from Harvard Divinity School and a JD from the University of Georgia. She's clerked for Judge Sam J. Irvin III on the Fourth Circuit and was one of the drafters of the American Bar Association's report and recommendation opposing anti-Sharia and anti-foreign law legislation. And she works with our keynote speaker last night, Michael Broyd, and Abdullah Naim at Emory in her dissertation. We also have, I'm not sure exactly what order, did we flip a coin? We'll go in, but...
We know what we're doing, yeah.
Yeah. You've worked it out?
Yeah.
Okay. So in some order that is different from the order of introduction, I assume, we also have Sam Freedman from the New York Times speaking. He's an award-winning author, columnist, and professor. He's a columnist for the New York Times. He writes the religion column, and a professor, which I read religiously as it comes out, and a professor at Columbia University, and the author of 6 books, including Small Victories, The Real World of a Teacher, Her Students, and Their High School, which was a finalist for the 1990 National Book Award, The Inheritance, which was a finalist for the 1997 Pulitzer Prize, and Jew versus Jew, The Struggle for the Soul of American Jewry, which won the National Jewish Book Award for Nonfiction in 2001. As I've mentioned, he was a staff reporter for the Times from 1981 to 1987, and he currently writes the On Religion column. He was also a regular columnist on American Jewish issues for the Jerusalem Post from 2005 through 2009, and has contributed to numerous other publications and websites. Wajahat Ali is a playwright whose work, The Domestic Crusaders, was the first major play about Muslim Americans living in post-9/11 America. It was published by McSweeney's in 2011. He's also an essayist, a humorist, an attorney at law, and writes for, I think, several websites, but primarily for Goat's Milk, is that correct?
That's my plug.
That's your
I'm very proud of it.
So some of the other websites I've seen listed at the end, but
It's all right. It's all right.
okay, I'll just say numerous other websites. And what order will you be speaking in? So Wajahat will open, and then Leanne will speak, and then Sam. And if you'd all come up here, and I will find a watch clock roughly. I'll put up my hand with 2 fingers, and there's 2 minutes left. What's that?
I'm going to go 15, 20.
Oh, so that's fine.
But if I go too long, you can cut.
So I'll give you 18. I'll give it.
We can start? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Good morning. Assalamu alaikum, shalom, and everything in between. Thank you so much for having this conference, and thank you for allowing a non-academic like myself to, at least for 2 days, be in the company of academics. And thank you, academics, for tolerating me. We start off the conference with this very heartwarming, inspiring, great conversation about the Islamophobia network and the Sharia controversy that you must have heard of. And for those of you who have not followed the Sharia meme, there is a fear of creeping Sharia supplanting the United States Constitution with Islamic law and replacing the stars and stripes with star and crescent. And I think some of you have heard of this. But I say Sharia has already infiltrated and conquered America. I mean, the signs are everywhere. Here are some of the signs. We re-elected a Muslim to the Oval Office, Barack Hussein Obama. Indeed, 17% of 2012 registered voters think that Barack Hussein Obama prays to the Kaaba, and as such is anti-American. First term Obamacare, second term Caliphate. We've also made strong progress in the culture war. 3 years ago, we put a tiara on Miss USA, Miss Rima Fahi, who comes from anyone? Dearborn, Michigan. And Ms. Rima Fahi is otherwise known as, quote, the Hezbollah-supporting Shiite Muslim whose bid for the pageant was financed by an Islamic terrorist and immigration fraud perpetrator, end quote, according to blogger Debbie Schlussel. Also, Sharia, according to some others, has crept into our supermarkets. We have placed hummus and tahini in every Whole Foods and Safeway supermarkets, which is eaten daily by suburban moms. And once you win over suburban moms, you've won over America. We have conquered American turkeys with our ally, Burt Butterball. Thanks to intrepid culinary detective Pam Geller, we've learned about the conspiratorial, quote, Butterball cover-up of foisting halal turkeys on the unsuspecting public, end quote. We've also infiltrated the most influential voice in America, the television. If you guys know about last year, we had a reality TV show called All American Muslim. Anyone know about that controversy? A simple reality TV show produced by the cable network TLC that erupted in international controversy. So if you do not know anything about this show, All American Muslim, you would ask yourself, what is this show about? You know, is it like Downton Abbottabad Abbey? Is it like, thank you, I'll take that. Is it like the Real Housewives of Al-Qaeda? Does it show homemaking tips, jihadi training grounds? What is so outrageous about this show that would cause a national and international controversy? It was so outrageous that if you guys remember, and Sam wrote about this as well, Lowe's, the retail giant, caved into what they said was, quote, enormous pressure and withdrew ads from this show, citing a response from, quote, a broad spectrum of customers. If you actually did the research, they actually submitted to an email campaign run by one organization by the name of Florida Family Association, which is an operation run by one dude with a terrible website and a huge email list by the name of David Catton, the sole employee of Florida Family Association, who has a history of boycotting corporations who sponsor shows like Family Guy, Modern Family, Degrassi, and worst of the worst, Disney World. And he received his talking points about the show much earlier from members of the Islamophobia network that I'll highlight. For example, again, her name will come up unfortunately a lot, Pamela Geller, who wrote on her blog that the show was trying to manipulate America into ignoring the threat of jihad. Did not know a reality TV show had that much power. And also David Horvitz's Front Page magazine, in which a writer wrote, the show was stealth propaganda to promote submission to Islam through the hijab, end quote. If you guys have been following the news last week, Muslims have already infiltrated the Tennessee state capitol with our, quote, foot washing sinks, end quote, for our ablutions before our 5 daily prayers. Our prayers, which if you were paying attention last week, are, quote, acts of terrorism, according to North Carolina Republican State Representative Presnell. The stealth edition of foot washing sinks was uncovered by Senator Bill Ketron, who brought it to national attention. So upon investigation, the Legislative Administration Director Connie Ridley wrote in an email, quote, I confirmed with facility administrator for the state capitol complex that the floor-level sink installed in the men's restroom outside the House chamber is for housekeeping use. It is, in layman's terms, a mop sink. Mop sink, foot washing sink. Tomato, hummus, Hamas. This stuff is ridiculous. One last one, the creme de la creme. Our infiltration of the international boy band sensation One Direction, featuring, if you have daughters, you know this, okay? Featuring Zayn Malik, who is a Muslim, and this is proof, and I quote, boy band jihad, mega pop star pimping Islam on your daughters, end quote, by blogger Debbie Schlussel. Now this is ridiculous, and we should laugh, and we have laughed. However, each one of these examples that I've given has been cited by members of the Islamophobia network, who are very much responsible for the fictitious Sharia threat, of proof that Sharia has infiltrated different parts of America. And in fact, if you guys pay attention from last year, nearly every single major Republican presidential candidate of 2012 ran on the anti-Sharia meme. I'll give you the names of the people who did it openly. Rick Santorum, Tim Pawlenty, Newt Gingrich, Herman Cain, and Michelle Bachmann. The manufactured fictitious Sharia threat is about as threatening as uncovering the unicorn or Bigfoot threat. Yet, 31 states in the past 2 years have introduced what we call the Anti-Shari'a bill, or a version of the Anti-Shari'a bill. Specifically, there have been 78 bills which seek to restrict the religious freedom of Muslims. And as you will find out in this conversation, it affects not only Muslims, but essentially all Americans. And many of them, unfortunately, have been given leadership support by mainstream Republican leaders. 62 of these 78 bills were based on the model template that was written by attorney David Yerushalmi entitled American Law for American Courts. I'm going to talk about that in this 4 minutes I have left. He is also the private attorney of Pamela Geller and Frank Gaffney. I'll be talking about him. 6 states have passed one version of this bill. This includes Louisiana, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Arizona, South Dakota, and Kansas. So the question should be, how did this all start? We got to go back to 2009, and a New Jersey family court judge, he denied a restraining order by a woman who said she was forced to have non-consensual sex with her Moroccan husband. Judge Joseph Charles Jr. said he did not believe the man, quote, had a criminal desire to or intent to sexually assault his wife because he was acting in a way that was, quote, consistent with his practices, end quote. The judge, for those of your attorneys, is clearly in error. And thankfully, within 2 months, the appellate court overturned the decision. So that's great, wonderful. The US law and court system works. Hooray. Release, exhale, awesome. Not so fast, because the Islamophobia industry uses that as a smoking gun proof of Sharia infiltration. Fast forward to 2010, we go to Oklahoma. State Representative Rex Duncan introduced State Question 755, also known as, quote, Save Our State Constitutional Amendment. For those of you who don't know, you should be asking yourself, save our state from what? Good question. This was a ballot measure barring, quote, state courts from considering international or Islamic law when deciding cases, end quote. The proposed constitutional amendment had really good timing because it coincided with the manufactured controversy over the Park 51 building in New York City in the spring and summer of 2010, which, as we remember, was dubbed the Ground Zero Mosque controversy, which was neither a ground zero nor a mosque. And the same way that controversy got mainstream, the Sharia controversy got mainstream. We'll talk about it in the discussion, just to save time. The leading anti-Muslim grassroots organization, Act for America, launched a $45,000 grassroots campaign in Oklahoma in 2010 to urge voters to support State Question 755. It also sponsored 1-minute radio ads that ran across the nation to warn against Sharia. 70% of Oklahoma voters voted for this to ban this non-existent threat. However, a federal judge quickly blocked the law for violating the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment and for blatantly targeting the Muslim community. In January 2012, an appellate court affirmed the ruling that prevented the voter-approved state constitutional amendment from taking effect. Specifically, in the opinion, the appellate court pointed out that proponents of the law admitted to not knowing of a single instance in which Oklahoma court applied Sharia law or the legal precepts of another country. An elected official who supported the anti-Sharia bill admitted he could not find any evidence of Sharia, quote, creeping into the state. And yet here we are in 2013 and 31 states are still talking about this. So there was a genesis to this fear-mongering created by a very few people. And in addition to my goat milking, I also was it's an honorable profession. I also was the lead author of this document, investigative report that we spent 6 months on, entitled Fear Incorporated, Roots of the Islamophobia Network in America. We've released it on the Google if you type in Fear Incorporated. And I did this with Center for American Progress, was released August 2011. And it's an investigative report on how we exposed how 7 funders have given over $43 million over the past 11 years to a small, interconnected, and I will say incestuous network of individuals, think tanks, and grassroots groups, and some religious right personalities to promote these divisive anti-Muslim memes. Before I go on, I think we should give the definition of Islamophobia that we uncovered, especially the type of Islamophobia that we've witnessed post the 9/11 tragedy in America. And the definition that we came up with is the following. Islamophobia is an exaggerated fear, hatred, and hostility towards Islam and Muslims that is perpetuated by negative stereotypes, resulting in bias, discrimination, and this is the key part, marginalization and exclusion of Muslims from America's social, political, and civic life. So for the first time, we dissected and exposed the network, categorized it, named the names, traced the funding and the money, and showed the genesis of several once fringe memes that have now gone mainstream. Nod your head if you've heard the following. President Obama is a Muslim. Sharia is a threat to America. Mosques are Trojan horses. Radical Islam has infiltrated America. There's no such thing as moderate Islam. Traditional Islam is radical Islam. And what's most damaging for Americans, practicing Muslims cannot be loyal Americans. Anyone heard at least 1 or 2 of these? It's very sad. Everyone's nodding their head. The threat of creeping Sharia is wholly manufactured by certain individuals and organizations who have a rich history of fear-mongering and hysteria and dubious associations. And I want to quickly break down how this happened. So the Islamophobia Network has 5 categories. I won't go into all of them in detail, I promise. We doing okay so far? Okay. 5 categories. Everything always begins with the money. The first group is what we call the money trip. We've identified 7 funders. The money primarily goes to the second part, which we call the nerve center, the Islamophobia scholars, and policy experts. Oftentimes originate from DC and think tanks. They're the ones who create the memes. Then the question should be, well, who cares? They're just memes. How do they spread? The third group is what we call the Grassroots Organization, and unfortunately also members of the religious right. The memes go spread through these constituencies, which also use new media, which goes to the fourth group, the media megaphone. Not just traditional news. There is a news channel in particular that is very responsible. On the count of 3, let's take a guess. 1, 2, 3.
CNN.
Dr. Muhammad Fadel wants to be a smartass. But no, it's Fox News, but thank you. I respect Dr. Fadel. I hope you don't mind. He's smiling, so he's not going to hurt me. Don't misunderestimate also new media, blogs, online radio. It's been critical. After it gets mainstream internationally with the media megaphone, these memes literally end up as talking points, verbatim in the mouths of politicians. And I just gave you an example of the 2012 Republican presidential candidates. I'm not going to mention the 7 funders, we've listed them, but the money then goes to the nerve center. And I want to talk about the nerve center real quick. The architect of the current anti-Shari'a legislation we have uncovered is Attorney David Yerushalmi. Are people familiar with Mr. Yerushalmi? Most people nodding their head. The ADL, Anti-Defamation League, has written of Mr. Yerushalmi, quote, he has a record of anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant, and anti-black bigotry, end quote. In a 2006 article, Mr. Yerushalmi even went so far as to claim that, quote, Muslim civilization is at war with Judeo-Christian civilization. The Muslim peoples, those committed to Islam as we know it today, are our enemies, end quote. Despite this, he has been invited by elected officials to give expert testimony on Sharia. He has appeared on mainstream press, such as NPR, to talk about Sharia, even though he's not a scholar in Islam, Islamic law, or a master of Arabic. He also happens to be the attorney of Pamela Geller, and the attorney of Pamela Geller and Robert Spencer's hate group, Stop Islamization of America, which has now evolved into being the Stop Islamization of Nations, which is cited as a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center, and cited by the ADL as promoting a radical anti-Islam agenda. We'll talk about this in our conversation, but they were also behind the manufactured controversy of the Ground Zero Mosque. And I really keep saying it's manufactured. And I think we should talk about how it was manufactured in the panel discussion, because that same template of how a non-issue became a local issue, became a national issue, became an international issue, the same way they did that playbook is at play with the Sharia controversy. Mr. Yerushalmi is also the founder of the think tank SANE, S-A-N-E, not making this up, Society of Americans for National Existence, which in 2007 proposed legislation to make adherence to Sharia a felony punishable by 20 years in prison. In 2007, his organization initiated the Mapping Sharia in America, Knowing the Enemy campaign that wanted to, 2 minutes? I can't even say my name in 2 minutes. All right, I'll try to finish. Sorry for going so long. Give me 5. Can I do 5? You guys, all right. Sorry, guys.
Special warning.
All right. You want to see what type of Sharia was practiced in every single mosque. In the press release, they said the campaign would test the proposition that Sharia amounts to a criminal conspiracy to overthrow the U.S. government. Equating Sharia with criminality, Yerushalmi further proposed legislation to make adherence to Sharia a felony. This includes then a Muslim woman who's wearing the hijab, like you in the back. That would be a felony under this definition. His major ally and funder is Mr. Frank Gaffney, who is the founder of the think tank Center for Security Policy. And specifically when it comes to, I want to give a great quote. Frank Gaffney, a mosque that is used to promote a seditious program, which is what Sharia is, that is not a protected religious practice. That is in fact sedition. Despite this, he concedes, I don't know much about Sharia, but I have talked a lot about that as a threat. End quote. And he's made $300,000 in the year of 2010. In 2010, and this is key, Center for Security Policy released a 170-page report called Sharia, the Threat to America, which misdefined Sharia as the preeminent totalitarian threat to America and the legal, military, political doctrine that seeks to supplant the Constitution, also co-written by David Yerushalmi. It's designed to provide a comprehensive and articulate second opinion on the official characterizations and assessments of this threat, as put forth by the United States government. Specifically, they define Sharia in a static, ahistorical, unscholarly way in which no practicing Muslim will ever recognize. Okay? And also what they do is they misdefine this word taqiyya, and I want to spend 20 seconds talking about it. They misdefine taqiyya as religiously mandated lying. In essence, they say that Islam encourages Muslims to lie and be deceptive. If you ask most Muslims what taqiyya is, most Muslims will think taqiyya is a new taco released by Taco Bell with extra guacamole. Most people have no idea. Taqiyya is an Arabic word which allowed a Muslim to hide one's faith in order to protect their life and family. It's very similar to in Jewish faith. It does not say you're allowed to lie, but look how insidious it is. It says that every practicing Muslim lies, so there's no such thing. Even the good Muslim, you can't trust the good Muslim because they're practicing taqiyya. In 2011, Mr. Yerushalmi developed a template for the current anti-Sharia legislation. I'm ending now, I promise, in a minute. Entitled American Law for American Courts, at the behest of the self-proclaimed nonpartisan advocacy group, American Public Policy Alliance. The organization claims one of the greatest threats to America and American values and liberties today comes from, quote, foreign laws and foreign legal doctrines, including Islamic Sharia law that has been infiltrating our court system. Leanne's going to go into more detail about how this has shown up in Tennessee and Arizona. And the American Bar Association reviewed this, and they called this entire movement an anti-Sharia initiative. They said, quote, many of the legislators sponsoring the anti-Sharia initiatives in other states are using the model legislation drafted by David Yerushalmi. The bill, if passed, would prevent Muslim American communities from having the same rights and access to courts as any other religious community in America. The fact that they've taken out Islamic law, because you guys remember in 2010 in Oklahoma, they realized it wouldn't pass constitutional muster, so they replaced it with foreign law or religious law, which has now concerned business communities and Jewish American, Catholic American, and Muslim American communities. Because if this is implemented, it infringes on all of our rights. And I'm going to end on this, promise. He also helped co-author Frank Gaffney's 2011 report, Sharia Law and American State Courts, an assessment of state appellate court cases, which evaluated what they said was 50 appellate court cases from 23 states that proved Sharia had infiltrated the U.S. court system. The ACLU thoroughly debunked the findings of this 2011 report in their 2011 report, Nothing to Fear, and concluded that the CSP report promoted a, quote, mythical Sharia threat. They rejected Mr. Yerushalmi's unsubstantiated claims of Sharia infiltration that's, quote, wrong, and said it was, quote, based both on misinformation and misunderstanding of how our judicial system works. However, the ACLU suggested an insidious purpose behind this entire movement to criminalize Sharia. Quote, prohibiting U.S. courts from considering Islamic law serves only one purpose, to bar Muslims from having the same rights and access to courts as any other religious individuals. So by defining Sharia as a problem and as a totalitarian threat, we are now to assume that all adherents of Sharia, which is essentially any practicing Muslim, they are deemed as threats to America. This casts suspicion on all observant Muslims as a potential fifth column. Politically and culturally, this inaccurate framing lends people to believe that Islam and subsequently all Muslims are not only utterly incompatible with America's political, civic, and social life, but they're also a continuing hostile threat. And in the conversation, I'll talk about how the grassroots groups and the media groups and the political groups have mainstreamed this. And I would also like to talk about how this has actually, ironically, served as a major national security threat to American citizens. Thank you for giving me the time. I'm sorry for going over. I'm finished.
Leanne, you're next.
So I want to talk a little bit about the evolution of these laws and their various guises that they've appeared in. Early iterations were very broad, and they have two prongs to them. It's not just Sharia or religious law. They also attack foreign and or international law. Now there is a difference actually between foreign law and international law. But that gets lost in the shuffle here many times, especially for example, in Oklahoma Save Our State Amendment. That one, as we talked about, specifically prohibited Sharia law, and also, let me see, the courts were not to consider international law or Sharia law, or even the law of another state if it included Sharia law. And also was specific against foreign law. So foreign law is the law of the country. So if you have a contract with a French company, you specify that you want French law to apply to that, a choice of law clause, very, very common in business, that would not be allowable under Oklahoma law had this amendment been put into effect. International law, treaties, international norms of law that may influence opinion. For example, you have 2 United States Supreme Court decisions. You have many decisions that consider international law and international laws. So you have a 2008 Supreme Court decision, Medellin versus Texas, where the Supreme Court decided it was not bound by the International Court of Justice judgment to stay the execution of a Mexican national. So we don't have to listen to the International Court of Justice. We can do what we want to according to our laws. On the flip side, in 2010, the Supreme Court of the United States had another decision in Graham v. Florida, where they didn't base their decision on it, but they referred to international opinion against sentencing juveniles to life in prison without parole. So there is this real fear of international legal norms coming into the U.S. system. We should put up a wall. We should not look at what anybody else is doing. There's a fear of foreign laws of other countries. We should put up a wall, not let that in. And then there's this fear of Sharia, which Wajahat talked about. So all of these are combined in a lot of these legislation efforts, and was definitely all appeared in the Oklahoma amendment. So we know that was struck down. It was struck down purely on First Amendment grounds, but it could have been struck down on a whole host of other constitutional grounds. You have the contracts clause. You can't freely contract in choice of law. That would have been a problem. Full faith and credit. They weren't going to look at the laws of other states if those laws somehow included Sharia law, which was totally unclear what that meant. And the supremacy clause. International law includes treaties. They weren't going to allow that to happen either. That's against the supremacy clause. So you had a fear among Muslims and other religious people, but they also engendered a great deal of fear among business communities that this was really going to handicap them in international trade and put them at a real competitive disadvantage. So if we're worried about it not passing muster under Sharia, which is because it singles out Sharia, then the next attempt was really to broaden it to not just include Sharia. So there was an Arizona bill that was introduced in 2011, and that opposed implementing or incorporating laws of foreign countries or foreign bodies in any state judicial decision, and also barred courts from using any religious sectarian law. So not just Sharia, any religious sectarian law, but they helpfully described what was included. So that would include Sharia law, canon law, Halakha, or karma. I'm not sure you can bar karma from a court, but I guess it's worth a try. So you have the same problems. You have, even though you're not singling out Sharia law, even by specifying religious law, you're still running afoul of the First Amendment. It's still bad for businesses. It still runs afoul of other constitutional amendments. A slightly different tact was taken in Tennessee, which is one of my favorite laws just because it was so egregious. And it was introduced by Ketron. And it was really an anti-terrorism bill. It was ostensibly designed to criminalize material support for terrorism. And it passed with generic language regarding material support for terrorism. But as it had first appeared, it was only Sharia organizations that provided material support for terrorism. So it had this whole big thing about Sharia, and the language in many cases was lifted straight from the Sharia Threat to America report. It was saying Islam is a military fascist totalitarian. They had wording that said, the observance of Sharia is prima facie evidence of a desire to overthrow the government. So if you're eating a halal turkey, you're trying to overthrow the government. It was ludicrous. But it was clear that by singling out Sharia, it was never going to pass. And it was really unnecessary. You can just strip that whole language about Islam and Sharia away and pass a reasonable law outlawing support for terrorism, and that is indeed what ended up happening. So it quickly became pretty clear that if you speak of Sharia specifically, or even religious law more generally, it's never going to pass muster. You're never going to get these laws passed. So they changed tact and adopted facially neutral versions of this law that don't talk about religion, they don't talk about Sharia. And by and large, the model for these is what we talked about, the American Public Policy Alliance's American Laws for American Courts model legislation. And this too has gone various iterations. The website, well, the legislation is facially neutral. The website that touts this specifically mentions the need for this law because of the threat of Sharia. And the specter of it somehow creeping into the court system. And has lots of lofty language about the necessity for protecting individuals' constitutional rights, especially that of women and children. So there are two main provisions that exist in it, and then over the years, the last 2 years, they've added specific carve-outs as well to overcome arguments against this legislation and concerns by business community and others about the possible impact. So the first provision is designed to protect citizens from the application of foreign law when doing so would violate their constitutional rights. You can't violate someone's constitutional rights anyway. So this is unnecessary. You can't apply law that's going to violate constitutional right. You always have state law that is above you. You can't violate criminal laws. This is just a total non-issue, and that whole part of the law is just unnecessary. The second provision says the court can't consider any law, legal code, or tradition that would not grant parties the same fundamental rights as in the U.S. Constitution. Now this is really trickier, and it's not clear what this means. So if French law doesn't provide all the same protections as the U.S. Constitution, we can't apply French law. There are a lot of systems in this world that don't have all the same protections. Freedom of press, due process, freedom of religion, Islamic law, Jewish law. A lot of religious laws don't provide equal protection for women. So it seems that just the fact that somewhere in this law tradition there is something that is not totally equal to the United States would mean that the whole tradition would need to be thrown out. It's not really clear if that is the case or how this would be interpreted. It's a very strange, poorly worded provision that can and has, as I will point out in just a second, had really bad impact on people's lives. So the concerns about international law, treaties, business laws have resulted in specific exceptions to the application of these two provisions that are listed now towards the end of the, most of them listed at the end of the model legislation. So this should not apply to Native American courts. This should not apply to corporations. So all business, corporations, limited liability partnerships, everything is not excluded from this law. So they're trying to get away from the concerns that the business community has. It will exclude religious organizations for ecclesiastical matters. So hiring and firing of clergy, church membership, that is not included at all. And it says it's not to be interpreted to conflict with U.S. treaties. So it started out this big, and it's been narrowed down, and all that's really left of it is a veiled but very targeted attack on religious law that's designed only to get, they only talk about Sharia, but it basically will get all kinds of religious law, including Jewish law, in its grasp. So what is the practical effect? There haven't been very many cases after these laws have been passed. They've been passed, I think, in 6 states. But Kansas gives a really good example because there were 2 divorce cases, one before the law was passed and one after the law was passed. That provide a good contrast. In 2010, there was a divorce case of Hamda v. Hamda. And if you go to the website for this bill, this is touted as one of the reasons why we need this law, to protect women, protect women's rights. Because in that case, a couple met in Lebanon, they were married there, the wife came over, things went sour, and the husband argued that the Islamic marriage contract meant that the wife was only entitled to $5,000 deferred dower as the divorce settlement. And so this is terrible for women. It's denying women the rights that they would have under the U.S. legal system. They don't talk about what the actual outcome of the case was, only that the husband argued for this. Just like the husband in New Jersey argued that his religious beliefs would allow him to rape his wife. So definitely we need this legislation to protect these poor, defenseless Muslim women. Then in 2012, there was another divorce case with the Soleimanis. The Soleimanis were married, I believe, in Iran. It was a short marriage. There were allegations of domestic abuse, and the wife, in this case, asked the court to enforce the marriage contract. And the court said, oh no, we can't do that. We have this American law for American courts law now, and we don't think that that would be allowed. So the wife, as a result, did not get the deferred dower which in that case would have been $677,000. So the wife was basically cheated out of what it would have been her legal right otherwise because of this law. It did not protect her. It did the exact opposite. So these laws are really distorting a system that was working fine to begin with. So the laws are unnecessary. The courts already have the tools to deal with them, and I would say that basically they're a red herring. And all they're doing is serving to demonize Muslims, but saying, we're not against Muslims, we're just against Sharia. So Muslims are fine as long as they don't do any of these Sharia things. So I call this the only good Muslim is a bad Muslim paradox.
Thank you.
As a religion journalist, I've written a fair amount about some of the issues that particularly Wajahat addressed, and so I don't want to be redundant to that, although we'll be able to root some of this around during the Q&A. So rather, my purpose here is to provide the contrast, which is to look at how issues of Jewish religious law have played out in the public sector, which I think really provides a significant difference and shows how, while these issues are sometimes painful to who are involved in them, they stand in real contradistinction to what Wajahat and Leanne have described, which is the disputes about Muslim religious law, which are actually stalking horses or Trojan horses for Islamophobia. The three types of disputes I want to talk about